all the leasing done internally.
Yep.
By the building owner. They have their own internal leasing agents and that sort of thing. So from that standpoint, then they're on a salary with maybe some sort of a bonus, structure sort of thrown in. And you would hope there that maybe it removes some of that, because they know their job may be on the line, that if they've done a horrible job of getting potentially good quality tenants, they're going to be fired after maybe a few months.
Don't you still have to pay a commission though for people that, even if you have your own in-house?
Well, you can just pay them on salary.
What about if a broker brings, like Trader Joe's broker brings and says, hey, Trader Joe's.
Well, yes, no, that, yes, but I'm talking about like internally.
Yeah, not internally, but if
yes.
outside someone says, hey, Trader Joe's wants to be here and I'm the procuring broker.
No, that, yes, you still have to pay a commission to them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and if
even
if the tenant goes back to the developer and he wants the procuring cost, you still have to pay.
Yeah.
If you can prove that.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. I didn't know. I've never done a commercial deal like that. Is it different on that level where the fact that, okay, let's say I have my own in-house shop. I have my own leasing staff. We go out and seek clients for our space. So if Trader Joe's walk in the door and I don't pay no brokers in my area or nowhere else, I still have to pay Trader Joe's?
If a broker brought him to you.
If the broker brought him to you, but you could also just simply say, well, we're still not paying any outside brokers. You can still have a stipulation, but maybe you wouldn't get Trader Joe's.
I wouldn't get that business, right?
Potentially.
Okay. That's the same.
Yeah.
If you disclose that to the broker, that you don't pay outside brokers, and if your tenant goes back to, because he wants that location, then he cannot argue that he was a procuring broker, because it was disclosed up front that they don't pay.
They usually call and ask first.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys pay commission over there if I bring this guy? Okay.
Right. Okay, so anyway, you get the general idea of what I'm trying to get at here. And to me, that's an extremely important sort of discussion point for you to sort of struggle with. How should some of these services be paid for? And because another angle to this would be, do you make effectively the leasing agents part of the deal? Do you actually just give them a piece of the development piece? Trammell Crow was famous for that.
Yeah.
That effectively, you say, hey, you're going to work for me, and I've got all the space that I'm developing, and to what extent, if you can, bring that many more, tenants to the table, then to what extent maybe I give you a certain piece of a residual cash flow stream from the property over the life of the project, and or a relatively small equity piece that in the event the property is sold at some point in the future, I give you that as well. All of that in place of the traditional upfront commission. You follow? So what do you think about that?
Heck yeah. Sign me up. It's consistent.
It's good. It really incentivizes brokers to really push hard to get spaces leased up, and I think it changes the dynamic a little.
Absolutely. Okay. All right, moving on. This next one. One of the things that was brought up by Mark is this topic of the mismatch of the term of the loan and the investment time horizon. And this is one where a lot of times whenever you get a commercial real estate loan, you get that loan, if we remember we were talking about in the finance class, you get that loan typically, it's like a 5-year term of the loan, in the sense of 5 years before the note is due and payable, with a balloon payment at the end of 5 years, but may have an amortization period of 15, 20, 25 years. We're saying, okay, well, big deal, because what we sort of said, well, that at the end of that 5 years, what are you going to have to do? Potentially go and get the loan refinanced to ultimately get it maybe for another 5-year extension or something like that. Well, that all normally would be a very easy slam dunk kind of situation of being able to do that. But what if market conditions have drastically changed from the time that you got the loan until now? So for example, you got the loan in 2007, 5 years later would have been what, 2013, roughly, okay? 2012, my brain's
Very rough.
tired.
Very rough.
2007, 7 plus 5 is 12, okay. All right, 2012. And so 2012 rolls along, and in 2013, though, you've got to refinance, okay? It's sort of the end of 2012 is what I'm trying to get at. Okay. So you've got to refinance, but think about it like this. Your occupancy is down. Current rental rates are lower than what they were 5 years ago at the time. Lending costs in terms of maybe interest rates have gone up maybe a little bit. And the market is squeamish in terms of potentially originating new loans. This is a very real sort of scenario that I know a lot of people that went through this, of you have a loan that you made on a property, $1 million property, and maybe you made it for an $800,000 loan. 5 years later, maybe the value of this property is no longer a million. Maybe the value is now $750,000, meaning that whenever you go to get that new loan, if they've kept the loan to value ratio constant, which they even didn't with that, and became more aggressive, but you would only be able to get a $600,000 loan. But the thing is, 5 years later, you're still probably going to owe greater than $600,000. So where's that money coming from? Out of your back pocket. Or you've got to sell the property, but yet selling the property may not solve the problem either, because if you're only able to sell it for $750,000, chances are you may have paid off that much. In other words, but the problem is you've lost all of your equity. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And so this whole business of kind of the mismatch of the term and then sort of the investment time horizon is that you had anticipated maybe holding this property for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, but yet every single 5 years you've got to go back to the bank, refinance that note. Does that make sense? Because most commercial loans, tend to be 5-year durations. Okay, so any thoughts about that?
I had a question.
Yep.
On the leasing though.
Okay.
On the cash flow, when you do your cash flow for the, for leasing, on that example, would you just expense the $18,000 the first year and then another $18,000 in 5 years for commissions? Since it's a 5-year lease, is that how you set that? You expense it all?
You expense it all up front.
Up front?
However, the benefit for it technically really doesn't occur until the cash flows are received. And so that gets into an accounting question that San Miguel would want to answer.
But I mean, if you're setting up your feasibility model and
Right.
you want to get your IRR on it, would you?
You would expense it all up front because that's when it's
And you
paid.
had like a 10-year hold period, would
Yep.
you do it,
You would expense it all up front because that's when it's paid.
so you do just the 18,000?
Yes. Well, no, I mean, if you're talking about the original scenario, not the one I was proposing with the monthly cash flows.
No, well, here, like this 5-year lease, you got a
Yep.
10-year hold on it, so you do it, you'd expense 18,000 the first year?
Yes.
And then on year 6, the 18,000 again?
Okay, where's this other 18,000? Is that coming from?
It's a 5-year lease.
Nothing you have
It's a 5-year
to sign
lease.
in.
Oh. Yeah, every 5 years you would have a $15,000, or I'm sorry,
Okay.
every 5 years you would have a $18,000
Okay.
expenditure, yes.
So if you kept that same tenant, does it automatically, you have to automatically pay that same broker?
Yes.
It depends on the contract.
Depending on
The contract you have with the.
In some cases, what will happen is there is a renewal option for that tenant, and then under that renewal, then there's a chance that it also will say that the original sort of broker that brought that tenant to you is eligible or is entitled to, usually a lower percentage than the original one, sometimes like half of what the original commission would be. Is that? But it does give them a little bit of a residual in that respect.
So again, back to the when you set up your your feasibility models and financial statements, would you just do an assumption, like everyone's on a 5-year lease, or everyone's on a 3-year lease, and then with the assumption that you'd have to pay full commission through the 10-year hold period that you would hold the property?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yes, you would. You would stage it depending on when those cash flows actually took place. In other words, when the lease commission was actually incurred.
Okay.
Because
And then you just make an assumption like every 5 years or?
Right.
Okay.
Now, it's interesting you bring that up because that's precisely what the Argus DCF program does.
Right.
It specifically sets you up where you can get as specific as you want in saying, all right, I've got a building with 100 tenants. Every single tenant in the building has a slightly different lease. Different start date, different end date, different lease amount, different features that they pay for or they don't pay for. You know, some may be triple net, some may be gross, you know, you can, anything and everything. But what it does, and that's why that program itself is of value, is it will precisely, assuming you put the correct information, is it will precisely show what those cash flows are to be able to roll up all of those leases into one singular sort of cash flow stream, and it will take into account the lease renewals, and then you will set up the assumptions of, I anticipate there is an 80% chance of renewing this tenant at this rate for this term, kind of thing. Or, you know, I expect that we're going to get rid of this tenant and we're going to replace it with a tenant paying substantially more, or, you know, whatever the case may be, but it rolls all of that into one singular thing. I mean, you can accomplish that, you know, obviously in Excel, but it's just going to be a lot more painful, because with this,
Right.
it's more of a database-ish kind of driven thing. We're putting in every single lease term, every single sort of characteristic, if you will, the abstract details of that lease into the program, and then ultimately it's spitting out what is your cash flow stream based on that.
No, because when we're doing that project for the MIT thing, I was trying to put that in there. I was kind of struggling with the commissions on
Yeah.
when they were getting paid. I thought maybe just kind of like prorate them all out, so it's
Yeah,
like an
and-
even stream,
Right.
instead
And-
of it just big hits 1 year and then the big hits
Yeah,
really affected the.
No, it does, and that's another sort of good discussion that you'll get to have in the accounting class with San Miguel, is, you know, even allocating things like capital expenditures. You know, because you may make a huge, massive expenditure on a new roof, or, you know, on a rehab of a property, but to what extent you're able to maybe only expense part of it in the current year versus having to allocate it over several years on a separate sort of depreciation schedule. Make sense?
If I recall correctly, you're with in leasing commissions, like, or capital expenditures, but with leasing commissions, if you go through the after-tax model, the after-tax IRR, leasing commissions, you spread them out, you amortize them. You amortize them during the 5-year lease, and that's an IRS.
You know, no, okay, you didn't say for tax purposes.
Not for tax purposes.
Yeah, tax
Yeah.
purposes is a totally different thing.
Right.
We're gonna talk about
You
that
amortize it
in the investments
I'm
class.
just looking at.
Yeah,
more
no,
your-
from cash flow
for your
perspective,
IRR,
yeah, cash flow perspective is totally different than tax.
Yeah,
Because yes, for tax, you do have to allocate over the term. In other words, you do actually show that it's like when the benefit, if you will,
Right.
sort of occurs, is whenever you have to sort of put them in there. But for cash flow purposes, that's strictly based on when you write the check and when you receive the check. So that's one of the first statement that I always make in the investments class: there is the real world and there is the tax world.
yeah.
You know, the real world operates with one set of rules, the tax world, totally different set of rules that don't inherently make any sense whatsoever. They're just the rules, okay? And so go down that road, okay?
Yeah, but they could have a pretty big impact
Yeah.
before where you're like, wow, yeah, I'm gonna achieve this. And when you go to the real world, that is the after tax, you say, oh shit. My IRR wasn't.
Well, and see, and that is
it was
one of,
13.
and you bring up a really good issue, and that is the one of taxes. And I don't want to get too deep into that, obviously, in this course, but just simply to say this, you actually, that is probably one of the most important things to say to a prospective developer. Never, ever do your financial feasibility based on an after-tax approach. The reason is, number one, the laws can change, but number two is the project should stand on its own financially without whatever sort of special IRS tax benefits that you may receive, like with historic tax credits and other low-income housing tax credits and things like that. That the project really needs to stand on its own. I mean, yes, it can be made better with those tax benefits, but it still should be financially feasible on its own without those things. Because the moment those things get removed, it potentially destroys your project, and they could be removed literally anytime. And this is precisely what happened in the 1980s. One of the reasons why we had one of the biggest real estate crashes ever, because the Tax Reform Act in 1986 was almost completely driven. That whole crash, a lot of it was due to just changing the tax laws, and all of a sudden real estate was evil in the sense of it was no longer this favored investment. But the reason why it was so favored is because one of the biggest things was, if you were a high net worth individual, you could effectively own real estate, and it was a tax shelter, and you could be losing money hand and fist on this real estate, but yet it was still advantageous for you to own it because you were getting direct write-offs against your ordinary income. Okay, and so they revised all that and said, okay, no more of that sort of nonsense. And then, also took into account that we probably had way too short of depreciation terms that were allowing people, for tax purposes, to write properties off way too quickly. And so they made those a bit more reasonable. But it devastated, at the time, the real estate market. I don't think there was an unintended consequence of what was happening. And so you had all these properties just ending up in foreclosure almost overnight because it didn't make any sense to own them anymore. So certainly that's why I'm saying, I think anyone that has gone through that will say, always make sure it's financially feasible before on a before tax basis, before you even consider the tax implications. Okay?
Just had a question on the long term, and what's like the logic behind and like the historical approach for why commercial loans have been shorter terms than residential?
Historically, it was because the lenders that originated those loans held those loans in-house, and they chose to make them fixed rate mortgages as opposed to variable rate mortgages. And so historically it just became kind of this matter of convention that commercial loans were going to have a 5-year kind of balloon note, and that a lot of the owners, kind of the mindset would be, well, maybe they even have a 5-year hold, kind of expectation. But what has occurred is, there are, some of the commercial loans that will have, a normal kind of 15-year term, 15-year amortization, and they exist, I guess is my point. It's just that there's still a huge volume of these, commercial loans that still have this kind of 5-year sort of maturity. And it was also a motivation by the bank to say, you get more fees out of you. That every 5 years you've got to come before us and you've effectively got to pay more loan origination fees, more processing fees, that sort of thing, so we can, extract a little bit more out of you. Okay? All right, other questions? All right, let's do this. We need to kind of break up the things a little bit. So let's have you break up into your groups, specifically the groups for the project. And what I would like for you to do is to start talking about a little bit how you are going to want to repackage or adjust the package. We're not done. This is just an opportunity for you to effectively talk to your fellow group members and get a little bit of sense. Also talk a little bit about the project. You can talk a little bit about the Microsoft Project Pro assignment that you have for your group with respect to what sort of things that you would want to include in that. How much detail and explanation. I mean, it's not part of my class, it's technically part of Kevin's. I'll give you a little bit of a chance to maybe talk about that as well, because I would like for you to include a piece of that in your final presentation to me in this course. Not the whole thing, just a piece, like one slide sort of thing of here's my timeline sort of thing, okay? Make sense?
Do we have the same restrictions on the number of slides, or can we just add a slide?
You can add some slides,
Okay.
okay? This is not the competition
Yeah.
thing. You can, add a few more slides, but don't get crazy with, doubling the number of slides. But I would say, yeah, add a few more slides and go from there, okay? We'll spend a little bit of time doing that. It'll give you a chance to kind of wake up a little bit more.
What is the final thing you want this to look like? Like the MIT plus?
Plus the Project Pro. That's
plus,
it.
Plus a one-page summary or no summary, or that's Kevin's?
That's
That's
Kevin wants
Kevin's.
a summary.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
So you, okay.
I just want you to spend a little bit of time, sort of discussing, to get ideas from your fellow group members as the kinds of things that you might want to include in the Project Pro sort of timeline. What level of detail, what specific kind of characteristics, are you going to get some good ideas, I guess, from your fellow team members? The other thing that I would encourage you to do as well, while you're in that same sort of meeting, is your individual Project Pro assignment, as Kevin talked about and I've talked about. I mean, once again, it's for his class, but I'm just sort of throwing this out there. It should be focused on kind of a generic project, or it could be a real project for a particular type of use, like either residential, office, retail, whichever type that you have the most interest in, and then preparing basically the Project Pro schedule for that particular product type to the extent that, once again, you include the sort of the detail that you think would be useful. Yep.
When you speak of detail, can you get into the exact?
You've got to make the determination. I mean, because broadly speaking,
Day two, we put up sheetrock.
no. I mean, you've got to sort of determine. I mean, if you kind of look, over time, the development process, somewhere up here, you have kind of the inception of the idea.
So, okay, so not as detailed.
Over here, you have, let's say, project, occupancy, and or sale. And then in between, obviously, you've got the things of like market analysis, you've got regulatory approvals, you've got obtaining financing, you've got, then you can kind of, once again, sort of, depending on where you're sort of placing this, overall sort of project design, which may actually come back and be over a larger period of time. Then you ultimately, somewhere in here, start construction. Somewhere along the line, once again, you're doing pre-leasing. So, at a minimum, those are some of the steps of the process, right?
Right.
You've got to make kind of some determinations as to when they begin, when they end. You've got to make determination of how much detail that you want to get into with each of those steps as to, specifically what kind of steps that you're going to go through for each of them. Does that make sense? The construction process, that one has got a whole bunch of stuff, but yet again, you could break that into steps of, all right,
Phase one.
you're going to start out with site prep work, foundation, so forth, so on. But each one of those steps is going to have, effectively different components. The regulatory process, you're going to have, have a meeting, let's say, with the city planner to determine what the zoning is and figure out what the requirements are as they are. If you're going to go through a zoning change, how long is it going to take you to go through that? How long is it going to take you to go through the permitting process? Those sorts of things.
Okay.
That's what I'm
Just
talking
get
about.
into it a little bit.
Right.
Enough to get you to the next step.
Right. You should just be identifying what are the individual component pieces.
It's more like a development type of project.
Yes.
Not a construction.
Right.
Right.
And the paper itself is.
Just an explanation.
It's an explanation, not about
Right.
how we're doing it and
Right.
the stages and the timing.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know if this is a question for you or a question for.
It's probably a question for Kevin.
If we're supposed to include like the costs, if he wants us to get that.
Yeah, I think to the extent that you can. Okay, once again, and I'm just, this is what I have said before, and I know Kevin shares his view. The whole idea, getting you comfortable with using the program and comfortable with trying to use some of the different features of the program, okay? You can effectively do something super basic, super simple, and probably be done with this thing in an hour, okay? Or you can really delve into it and try to take full advantage of all of the, or a good, not all, but a good number of the features and whatever, to just try to elevate your own personal sort of understanding and knowledge of the program to say, okay, I'm going to use this at some point again in the future. I might as well kind of, learn what I can from it. So it's meant to be kind of a group exploration of the program followed by an individual exploration of the program. That's the idea behind it. Does that make sense? Okay. So, all right. So go ahead and break into the groups, talk about it a little bit, and we'll kind of regroup.
On the 26th, you're going to show the videos of the groups in
That one?
the
They want that one?
presentation.
Oh, no.
Based on that, it was pretty good.
Okay.
Not bad.
Some of my friends are attending.
I'll try to.
Oh, okay.
And they all ask me,
Building A,
No, the plan is this is going to be just kind of, I think we're going to talk about that as well.
I don't think we're gonna be able to merge it.
This is going to be more of a opportunity kind of for a question and answer with the developer and their team.
Technically, they are two separate
and
projects.
if you have really good advertising.
What I'm afraid is gonna happen.
They have friends from the church or Ellis and.
Well, what I'm afraid is gonna happen is they're gonna, instead of being like this, the two projects, they're gonna be like this. And you're not gonna be able to know site work for A is for A, and site work for B is for B, even though you're only gonna know the site work for A started in January and site work for B starts in October.
I'm wondering if there's a way to like do that.
Try it.
I mean, my guess is I play around with it and see if that can be done. I'll play around with it too.
lone soldiers in your,
And then
Yeah, we just had a
if we
good
can't,
conversation.
we'll just leave it as, hey, we're doing it, we're attacking the whole project at once, and make it.
Somebody killed the project pro stuff.
So what do you think about it?
policy, and then as far as,
I use it every day.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if you wanna maybe just work on the costs,
use smaller versions, but
put those numbers in
our clubhouses
and allocate the percentages to it.
Or pretty much anything. All of our contracts apply to us. Those are the schedules we're looking at.
I think you have to do it like that. You gotta put in like the plumber and his, and you put in the cost in there.
So I'll have a team meeting,
Right,
get,
look at mine.
myself
Put in
and
the
all
cost,
the
and then you just allocate the percentage.
and just talk about schedule.
Because if you don't allocate the percentage, it's gonna assign that cost to it every time.
Schedules are all
You know what I'm saying? Like the plumber's $2 million.
And make it
And
like
then every
material
time you
cost.
see him, yeah, every time you see his name on the task, you just say, you know, for the site work, the rough, say it's 10% of the job.
I'll need your face one to do that.
I know this, yeah, I don't know.
Year-long projects, so you got like 20 days.
Sometimes.
As long as the final date remains the same, we're on it.
Good news is, we already understood the concept.
That's what I'm saying, so when you're going over it, you want to. That would be real. Right, everybody met.
Did you see the one that I sent? It's the days.
Now I have.
I mean, we can adjust those days. I just try to keep the whole development period like within under.
Well, I want to see what everybody comes back with.
We're assuming, you know,
And,
we're assuming that
finish up.
first the charade where everybody participates,
Yeah.
everybody agrees. And the need is just, you know.
As long as you
get it back and you
understand.
So, but
Well, that's why I think we gotta mix it up a little bit.
But I think we should add it, stating that,
I didn't have a tab in there for a lead at all, so we can add that task and then we can just do the duration over when we want to start another project. And so I would assume that the lead would probably start like a pre-design or during the, like right when the architectural design starts, after the lead starts. And then we can take that all the way to the end. Maybe it has to go out a couple of months past the end of construction, because then it has to get operational.
You know, one thing you might think about in terms of distribution of work is to what extent do you try to delegate different portions of this to different group members to come up with the detail. Does that make sense?
So everyone get a little practice
I think that, but we also, there's one, which,
I want to, before we finish, just show you this and tell me, this is the right way to do it.
Because I don't know where Robert.
So I haven't assigned any like dollar, but you see how
Right.
it takes the subs and over allocates them? It's looking
Right.
not as nice. But if I put, so for work here, you know, in contracting, we're not gonna break out each group.
No, that's not working.
So we call them a material instead.
Nice job with presentation.
And then they don't get over allocated, and then we can assign like a cost.
Right.
To like $2 million of the payment. And, but then when you do that, and you come back in here, every time he shows up at the dinner, he's getting paid $2 million. So the way to get around that is you put it here for the, so like the architects here, you would just say that he would, you know, get his,
Okay.
but it just seems very like
Yeah.
heavy
I don't know.
on the tasks that have to go through each
Yeah, no, I would agree.
one, and then also come in here and say, okay, well, you know, and break it out.
Right.
As far as, each time their name shows up, like the fit out versus the rough,
Right.
you know, it's such an arbitrary number they throw down there, well, I guess it's 10%.
Right.
And all it's doing is allocating the cost, it's not allocating
Right.
their time or their,
My only advice would be that may be too much detail.
it is, but we're
Well,
trying to figure it
no,
out.
I understand. That's a Kevin question.
Because even when you download the template, the one that comes from Microsoft Project Pro, for, what was that, residential? Commercial construction, it has the subs listed as labor, not as utility. And they don't count, they do it in percentage of the allocation, so they don't, but it's not really material. I guess it is.
Because what we were saying is like, you know, the way the like project is set up is so that you can give everyone like an hourly rate.
Right.
But in actuality, if you're a general contractor and you're hiring guys, you're hiring them at a fixed cost. Right. Without having change orders. And so it's just based on a percentage of what they complete, not so much, okay, this is their hourly rate.
Right.
So that was the sort of thing we were trying to figure out how to really put that in with make sense. So we can do like a cost report. And that
Right.
sort of thing. So that's kind of like one thing for us.
Well, I understand what you're trying to do. I mean, I do, but I just, that's, like I said, that's a, definitely a Kevin question.
Anyways, they had templates already made.
Right.
And you click on commercial construction, and then that was the way we were kind of, like, how did they do it on their back end to see how to allocate their costs?
Right.
But they have all their subs, they have all the subs down as, and then they allocate them.
Right.
I wish we were meeting with Kevin one more time.
So. I would email him and call him. You can always try to go to the meeting.
Just send a file
Yeah, I would do that.
and ask them.
Yeah, that would be
Right, the
the
best
most
way.
logical thing.
Yeah.
Say, okay, here's my file as is, here's what
I'll
I'm trying
send
to
it to him now.
accomplish. See if he can give you a response.
And I'll ask them about those concerns.
Do you want to send it now?
Yeah, I'll send it now. Do you have it on your email?
No, but here, I'll let you go on the phone.
I just plugged into that.
I mean, the presentation's pretty straightforward. You're not going to like a million% detail. You're going into like, here's the structure, this is the plan. You're going into some detail, don't get me wrong, more than the slides get, but you don't get to talk about the financial model for 20 minutes. You might have 5.
Your background made it hard to read.
They don't this is like, I guess, actually to be honest, they did not have a report any costs. I think that's what we saw.
All it was, oh, that's how I did that, and then they flashed.
Right, zero.
That's all the show was.
So while they put percentage, I think that was just so that those things are not over allocated. And then I think that's why Dustin?
And let me send this.
You know, flashback, yeah. It's like, oh, like the top of it.
Has to be a way to do it so that.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, that's, I mean, yes, it shows you the timeline, but it should also show you the costs over time, and you shouldn't have to put in every individual person that's coming to Because when you have somebody's showing up to work and they're having 3 people day 1 and 12 people day 2, I mean,
Yeah. And what do they do?
it's not reasonable for
Oh
you,
my
because you're not paying them,
God.
they're making money, but the supplement's making money on, on the deal too.
They don't get into it.
I think that's
You
that's
sound
that's-
just like this, by the way.
that's
When you,
overvalued.
like, when you say that, it's,
I'm glad.
he's always.
He's better.
He's like a hard somebody who's
Just going
ever,
over like
he continues to
the
make.
basics.
Was it Lana? They have a kid together?
Yeah.
They have that song, like, they sell.
Those are okay
people
to
to
read,
CIA,
but
right?
if you keep going, it's just,
That's such a great.
that's like that.
Honestly, it's
You
hysterical.
can't use it
Oh,
as
you
fast.
don't get to really watch that much. No one
This is
has
the
a
one
one.
you turn down, so this is the one that counts.
I don't wanna hang out.
That
I mean,
is too much.
honestly, I don't. It's so good.
Gotta either mute it, you know.
I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, why is that not like, watch this shit? It's on
Gotta
Netflix.
recognize,
Crush that.
this is too much, it's too busy of a background. You're telling
They have a kid the other day.
And it's not the font, it's the
Yeah.
background. So it's good.
There's so much adult, but
I know, there's a button.
I'm obsessed with this movie Frozen.
I really think this is your brightness
Is it
button.
Mola?
But I don't want to.
That's all.
I'm telling you, it's such a great.
But I think if you do shift,
That's all it's trying to get us to do.
there you go. It just looks like it would be, that's usually where it is. There's no way your screen's supposed to be that
I
dark.
figured because I didn't plug it in.
Right, yeah.
I think it's awesome.
Did you see that song about the ice that was in the summer? The guy's like singing song.
Okay, okay.
So how do, what are they doing?
So they're putting in the percentage here. They just did not put any cost in. So I'm wondering if you can put cost in on this side, you know? I guess you'd have to work it out in Excel.
Your number lock?
Do you have that sheet that says which classes are offered when? It's like the biggest mystery when I'll actually finish the course.
I mean, as long as we all come here, like, okay.
What are you gonna do for your?
I'm doing a residential farm.
That's what I was gonna, like single family?
Multifamily.
Oh, I wanna do single family. When I first decided I wanted to go into real estate, that was always something that I wanted to do. But then I sort of learned about all the other types of things, just went off on interested tangents and all that, and I was like, you know what, I should at least do a little bit of research on this. And I figured I'd make some calls and actually learn something through it. Cause I don't know anything about this. Like when plumbing and this and that, you know, that's just not.
It's not hard to pick up, it's just.
No, of course
think
not,
about
you
it,
just
it's
have
like
to.
when-
I think I'm gonna call my cousins who do it, and see if they'll have like a phone call with me and explain. I wish I could get out there.
I mean, like a residential project is you come in, you do some site work, so.
Yeah.
You do the due diligence, you do the.
Next January.
The plumbing.
That is correct.
Okay,
Like
so
a
regardless, submit it through
Then
spring
before
2016
concrete.
term.
I mean, that makes sense, you wouldn't do it the other way around,
And I
like.
mean, you know, like, let's say you're doing a slab.
Right.
There might be a little work before, but, you know, ideally for us,
Thanks.
if sort of like the slab, the formwork for the slab is laid out, we can measure against that, obviously, so
That makes,
that's
so you
better.
might measure against the formwork.
Right, so
Or
you-
you rough in
Exactly.
your plumbing,
Right, so you
and
measure
then the
against the
plumbing
formwork.
goes.
Right, And then once that's done, electrical, I think still might happen there as well, some electrical.
But there's two requirements. Well, I mean, there's multiples, like once it goes in, but there's an initial, when you're talking about like the roughing, are you talking men, or are you talking like once the form and the concrete's been poured?
No, so there's a ground rough. Right.
See, that was,
Right.
everyone just called it the rough.
Right, so
Like ground, and then-
there's ground rough that the plumbing goes in first, and then after it's poured, then when you put up your, okay, so you got your slab now, you do your block walls, you do your tilings, then you do your trusses, then you do your roofing, plywood, then roofing material, then you can then put in, once the trusses and all that is up, you could technically start some interior frames. Which is,
Have to, like, for all the load bearing walls and stuff, don't those have to go in?
no, if you're doing like a typical sort of like Florida, one story, you don't have to, a lot of them, these trusses now are clay span, just going from one tidy all the way to the next.
So they
Obviously,
don't even have load bearing anymore, like
Not-
much in
not-
the new residential?
it depends. If
I mean,
the
obviously, if the
span-
house has 6,000
Right,
square
right.
feet, you're gonna have
Yeah,
some load bearing walls.
right, so that wall might be, that wall, you're gonna have to, it might be a port column, it might be a steel column, with a steel beam. No, there's some guys in style, so you have a steel beam, and then trusses, you need to then bring the trusses and they'll sit on top of that.
Okay.
So that'll have to be first, and then you do your interior framing, and then
The
that's when a
plumbing
lot
and
of the
electrical.
electrical happens. When a lot of the plumbing, interior happens again. That's when the AC guys come in, when all their duct work and all that. And electrical has to work with AC a little bit. Hot water heater, plumbing and electrical has to work together a little bit. That's when you run all of your, if you're doing phone lines, low
That's
voltage,
the
all
least
of that.
expensive time to do it,
goes
is
in.
when it.
Right, so everything goes in there. Then along with all these points, you have inspections. And then that's once you pass all of those rough inspections, then you have actually the framing inspection to make sure that the guys didn't damage your framing at all. Then you come and you hang your drywall. Then you have your drywall inspection, then you finish. Yeah, they come, or they measure, it's important at times, especially with ceilings, because they gotta make sure there's enough screws on each sheet. And it's spaced a certain
That makes
distance.
sense. I would have never thought of that.
And then
In a ceiling, it makes sense, but like on the wall.
even on the
what if-
wall.
What if you have like wood, people wood ceiling, and you have, I mean, it's not common in South Florida, but.
Whatever finish that is, they want to make sure it's gonna stay. So you have that, and then you have, and then you start doing like the finishes.
Teaching me the process of the building.
Teach me, because
Yeah.
I don't know.
Probably better than that. And then you do your finishes and you start doing like your firework.